Bloodbending is one of the most terrifying subbending techniques ever invented in the Avatar universe. It allows its user to manipulate the victim in almost any way they want and puts the victim totally under the user's control. This was achieved by bending the large amount of water within the bloodstream of the human body. But this means that waterbenders are the only ones who have access to this forbidden technique. Or does it? Human blood contains iron, which is what gives it its red color. So what if earthbenders who learn to become metalbenders could actually bend the tiny amounts of iron in the human blood, becoming the first Earth bloodbenders in the Avatar world? Well, let's break how this could work down in detail. To see why this is even on the table, you have to go back to the exact moment that Toph breaks the rule of earthbending. Before her, the line is pretty clear. Earthbenders can move earth, waterbenders can move water, and anything that has been processed by human hands into purified steel or refined iron sits outside of the reach of both. But Toph gets around this by noticing something very obvious in retrospect, which is that refined metal isn't actually pure. There are always small bits of unrefined earth trapped inside of any finished metal object, except of course platinum in The Legend of Korra. And if your seismic sense is sharp enough to pick them up, you can manipulate the whole object by grabbing those fragments. Toph teaches this technique not only to her students at her metalbending academy in the comics, but also to her two daughters, Lin and Su-Yin. The basic idea is that every generation after Toph raises the ceiling of what earthbending is and what it's allowed to touch. So with that in mind, the human body would not be off limits for future earthbenders to look into to see what they could manipulate. In the human body, you're carrying roughly 4 grams of iron at any given moment, and most of it is sitting inside your red blood cells, bound up in a protein called hemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule holds 4 iron atoms. Each red blood cell contains something like 270 million of those molecules. The average adult has around 25 trillion red blood cells circulating at once, providing a perfect vector for earthbenders who want to bend the iron inside of your bloodstream. And the blood is not the only avenue that earthbenders could use to bloodbend a target. There's also the skeleton. Bones are made mostly of calcium phosphate, which is a mineral in the straight geological sense of the word. If you ground up a human skeleton and poured it on a table, you'd be looking at a very specific and very structured type of earth. At the end of the day, calcium is a type of earth. So when you combine the iron content of the blood and the calcium content of the bones, the human body packs more raw mineral content than a lot of refined metal objects do in the Avatar universe. The iron in the blood is obviously more diluted than the iron in a sword, but it's still the same element in the same family. The calcium in your bones, they're more organized than the calcium in a limestone cliff, but they still come from the same geological family. If metalbending works because the earth stays earth regardless of what shape it's been pushed into, there's no clear reason that this principle would stop at the human body. Why should it stop at the surface of the human skin? So now that we've established that the iron in your bloodstream and the calcium in your bones could be used as attack vectors to bloodbend a victim, let's look at how an earthbender would actually use this and what they would actually do with it. So there are 2 realistic versions of the ability, and both of them are quite ugly. The first is something you could reasonably call iron bending through the bloodstream. An earthbender would grip the iron sitting inside of a person's hemoglobin, and because that iron is suspended inside of red blood cells that are themselves riding through the closed, pressurized vascular system, even a small pull on it would translate into a huge disruption across the entire circulatory system. Some of the things you could do with the blood variant of this earth bloodbending is, first of all, a heart stop. You could briefly halt or fatally disrupt the blood movement through the heart, stopping the person's heart and basically killing them on the spot. You could do a silent choke by cutting proper circulation to their head and neck until the target blacks out. You could do an internal rupture by violently tearing blood vessels from within the body, killing them instantly. You could make them walk like a marionette by forcing the victim's whole body to move in stiff, unnatural motions. This would be one of the most terrifying versions, but it would also be the most version in line with what we saw in the Puppet Master episode of the original series. On top of that, you could force a target to completely collapse on demand. You could drop all of the strength from all of their limbs at once, making the target crumple instantly. This would be an extremely effective move on the battlefield. An earthbender wouldn't even need to throw anyone around like a puppet. A gentle tug in the right direction would be enough to kill the target immediately by bursting their blood vessels. So that's if they wanted to take a more aggressive approach, but if they just wanted to control someone, you would need extremely fine control to be able to move the blood vessels within the human without actually bursting them or killing them. This would take an earthbender off somebody with a skill even more than Toph. It would take someone with such fine and precise control that it would really be limited to only 1 in every billion people living in the Avatar universe. It would be such a rare ability that it wouldn't be too much of a concern to the authorities in Republic City or in any other nation. But it still is physically possible. And that leads us onto the second version of this earth bloodbending, and that would be called bone bending. And there's a case for even calling this one worse. Toph's seismic sense already lets her feel the exact position of everyone in her environment by reading the vibrations that their weight makes against the ground. At some level, she's already sensing the calcium architecture of a human human skeleton in the same way that she senses stone formations. If that kind of perception could be flipped from passive into active, a very skilled earthbender would be able to move people's bones directly from a distance. You could do so many things with this. If you just wanted to move them, you could just move their bones into the correct positions. You could levitate them in the air by lifting their bones. You could lock a joint into place to stop them from doing something. You could crack a joint. You could do so many things with bone bending. And it would be absolutely terrifying and blood-curdling to hear the sounds of their bones cracking under somebody else's pressure. In fact, using the bone variant of this technique would allow someone to paralyze the target by pressing against the spine from the inside, without ever laying a finger on them in person. You could have them held still in place just by compressing their spine in the right way to stop them from having control over the rest of their body. That is absolutely horrifying. So knowing that these techniques are possible in theory and in practice and how they would be used, why has none of this ever shown up in the Avatar canon yet? Well, the reason is, it probably comes down to culture and storytelling rather than any real limit on what bending could do. Earthbending comes out of the Kyoshi era philosophy of patience, listening, and defensive strength. The Earth Kingdom's whole military identity is built around fortification and siege warfare. The kind of person who'd spend years developing the ability to stop a stranger's heart from across a courtyard, that pretty much gets filtered out of the Earth Kingdom dojos very quickly. Anyone with that type of attitude would be kicked out straight away. And the stories told within Earth Kingdom culture just simply wouldn't have those type of elements in them. First of all, those things weren't discovered, and second of all, it goes against their whole philosophy of patience, strength, and solidity. Waterbending, by contrast, has an entire parallel healing tradition running alongside its combat tradition, which is a big part of why Harma was able to reverse engineer bloodbending in the first place. From knowing the body so intimately well through the healing tradition, Harma was basically able to come up with bloodbending through knowing the body so well and being able to know exactly what would happen if she controlled the right parts of it. Earthbending simply don't have those parallel traditions just yet, and no earthbender that we've seen in the current canon has ever been put into such a bad position like Harma to spend years in solitary confinement to be able to develop and have the patience to come up with this technique. And then of course there's the Toph factor. Toph was the one earthbender in the canon with the sensory acuity and the rule-breaking instinct to be able to invent metal bending, and that figure simply didn't exist, and she was simply a good person who simply wouldn't have thought to use bloodbending as an earthbender. The closest that the current canon ever comes to exploring this idea is with Kuvira's occupation arc. She restrains enemies with metal bands that wrap around their limbs, which is already a combat application of metal bending, and it's not hard to see if her whole army was using this for so many more decades that somebody within the army would have thought, hey, why don't we just use the metal directly inside their body instead of having to use external metal? And now I'm going to leave you with something extremely scary to think about for the Avatar 7 Havens. It's actually very likely that one or both of these techniques were used during the collapse of the world in the final moments of Avatar Korra. We know that in the 7 Havens, the world is completely destroyed and Korra is at fault. And in this environment, it becomes an absolute wasteland. Everybody is dying, everybody is struggling to survive in any possible way that they can. In this time, there are no standards of morality, of decency, of decorum. People do whatever they want and whatever they have to do in order to survive. So if any time in the Avatar timeline is suitable for this type of disgusting and terrifying use of bending, this would be the time. And because the Earth Kingdom is the most populous kingdom at this time, before the collapse and during the collapse, it's likely that something like this would have emerged if somebody was desperate enough. If somebody was in their final moments against a horde of bandits coming to steal their food, you can see them using this technique in order to survive and live another day. If you enjoy forbidden, horrific, and terrifying bending techniques just like this, hit that subscribe button as I'll be covering plenty more on the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.